It's my pleasure to introduce Quentin Clark. Quentin started at Microsoft in '94 as an STE and worked his way up to where he is now. He joined the WinFS team in 2002. And I think this talk will be particularly interesting for research because WinFS is about having a lot of data on your at your fingertip. And I come from learning, so for me data is really, really important because when we have a lot of labeled data, we can do a lot of things. So I'll let Quentin take it from here.
Thanks for having me. So I could probably talk for about 10 hours on WinFS. I'll spare you that litany and spend an hour instead and then give you a half hour for questions. But I'll take them as we're going because that seems to work pretty well too. As G said, I've been at Microsoft for about 9-10 years, something like that. My current job is to run the program management team for WinFS. Done a variety of things in the past, including working in Office, working on the web server, working on management products. I was the founder of the Application Center product, which was a sort of scale-out solution for the enterprise. So I've done a variety of different things. I was asked to do this job because, in part, the SQL guys, whom many of you I know, are database guys to the extreme. In fact, it's part of the reasons we'll succeed here with WinFS is because of them. But they need some end-user perspective, some better discipline around working with the rest of the company, et cetera. So that's why I was asked to come and do the job I'm doing today. So we'll talk about, most of this talk actually wasn't designed to talk about WinFS per se. Most of this talk was designed to talk about why we're doing WinFS. And regardless of whether or not we get some particular API pattern correct, or whether or not we've gotten every single semantic of Win32 file I/O API behavior correctly, the genesis of why we're doing WinFS and what its relevance is to Longhorn and what Longhorn's relevance is to the company is actually more important than the details right now of okay, the fourth parameter of the create file API has the following weird behavior when it's being used by PowerPoint 2000. Go replicate that, right? Like, we'll get those details as the bugs come in. What's important right now to the company is what the heck is WinFS and why are we doing it. That said, I will actually talk about what WinFS is. We'll walk through well, you guys won't think of it as an architecture diagram. In fact, you'll probably be largely offended by what I show on the screen, but bear with me. This presentation comes from a presentation I was doing to a collection of fairly senior folks in the company, so I had to stay at a fairly high level, technically. And then I'll talk a little bit about why WinFS is different than, say, Cairo or JAWS or Exchange Local Store, or you raise your hand and name your favorite integrated storage effort at Microsoft over the past N years. So, first question is, why don't we all work in Cupertino today? And you guys are probably a good audience to hazard guesses at that, but the basic gist is the Macintosh, in the era that it was born, certainly had a better UI than the IBM PC. There wasn't a Windows even then, right? I mean, it's undebatable, right? I mean, users were more productive. They could get more done more quickly. But it was an incredibly closed system, and not just from a hardware perspective, but Apple started this trend that scared ISVs right away by including a word processor and a painting package in the operating system, in the Mac OS. I'm actually not able to see this, so I need to do something differently here. And it was a sort of hard developer platform to use. The developer kits they had weren't very good. The applications had bundled, etc. And they weren't able to spark the interest of ISVs and kindle this relationship between them and software developers to build great applications on the Macintosh. You contrast this with the IBM compatibles of that era. These are some ugly boxes. I mean, the UI was, remember the amber on black, right? Good old amber on black monochrome, yeah. The whole, click, the whole sound of using the thing, the whole thing was just terrible, right? It didn't make a friendly beep sound when you booted it up. It was just awful. But there were a ton of them. In fact, Dell, when I looked up this stuff, I was actually surprised by some of this information. Dell was founded in 1984, the same year that the Macintosh was launched. Gateway was born in 1985. There was this burgeoning community around building not only just the hardware, but also in building applications. Certainly by 1988, there were 3 or 4 different sort of multitasking apps, if you will, that allowed you to do use different programs within PC-DOS at the quote-unquote same time. They would switch between these applications. So there was a fairly strong development community around it, and that ecosystem is what really made us what we are today as a company. I mean, Microsoft's foundation is all about developers, right? I mean, Bill left college to go build instructions for flipping switches on the Altair effectively. I mean, that's what they started doing. So to build this basic environment for the earliest personal computers. And so that's kind of where we started, right? We had the versions of BASIC, etc., for IBM PC-DOS right away. And that developer ecosystem was very, very different. And so different, in fact, that when you walked into, well, let's see, a place like Egghead Software, which I guess doesn't even exist anymore today. Maybe it does a name somewhere. There were like 2 shelves, right? There was the Mac software shelf, which was a row long, and there was the IBM PC software shelf, which was just filled with stuff, ranging in prices and functionality and features, etc. And so consumers faced with that were like, okay, I can do more of this other thing, but I've got to learn more about it. It still is more powerful, it's still more useful, and businesses certainly adopted that much more readily. So this is a stock chart. I mean, it's obviously not adjusted for stock splits or whatever, but the orange line I have is my attempt at sort of normalizing it across the particular inflection points and whatever, and also my attempt at sort of getting rid of the whole .com bubble and burst and all that stuff, trying to normalize that. But if you look at there, and you got to think of it in terms of log, right? But there are these huge inflection points here and here, and these coincide with releases of Windows, of major versions of Windows. And that second one, of course, is Windows 95. And Windows XP is the pinnacle release of Windows 95. And I know if you've worked on XP, I don't mean to offend you by saying that, but that's what it is, right? We haven't really introduced significantly new capabilities in the operating system in years, since 1995, effectively, since we released Windows 95. And that's why it's flat at this point, right? That's why the company's not seeing the kind of growth, and that's why the industry's not seeing the kind of growth. We haven't given the world the next set of opportunities around innovating in the platform to raise, once again, the productivity and rekindle the ISV engine. So, more on this, right? Yeah, it's my favorite stuffed animal. It's actually a dog toy that I have. The platform, don't be fooled. I mean, we're all sitting here in cushy chairs in a beautiful conference room in a research facility that's, I believe, is unparalleled in the world at this point, right? For software, certainly. And I assume you guys have little rooms with smoke and speakers and stuff where other interesting things are going on than just software. But nonetheless, we have this unparalleled reality right now, but it's under attack. We could all find ourselves out of work in 8 years, easily, right? The minute corporations and consumers stop buying this thing called Windows, it's all over. It's as excited as we are about the 7 P&Ls and about the growth of MSN and all this stuff, the reality is our bread and butter comes from the whole Windows ecosystem. It comes from the fact that we sell the desktop operating system and sell a lot of it, and have provided incredible value to users over the years, especially when you compare it to price. But we're under attack. The Linux guys, it's a very odd animal to compete against, and fortunately, there's more to it than just the promise that it's quote-unquote free, right? In fact, it's not free. And there's studies done, you can go look them up on Google or whatever, studies done that show that, geez, maybe the cost of voting Linux really isn't so good after all for corporations. That's actually helped stave that possible tide. But without a doubt, those guys are trying to catch up. Steve Ballmer at a conference called WIPS, that I know a couple of you were at, I know you were at WIPS, he said, assume Linux is the perfect cloning machine. Assume that we put out a feature, people need it, people use it, it'll get cloned. Not necessarily instantly. And our job, in some ways, with the next generation of the platform, is to make that bar harder and harder and harder to clone. It's not, and this is going to sound slightly sort of egotistical, but it's not going to be easy to clone WinFS. We're building an innovation there that's going to be incredibly difficult just to turn around and clone. The way we have things integrated with the file system, the way we have the data model, the experience we've used from the SQL engine itself, this is just going to be very difficult to clone. So, but in general, you can't assume that they're a perfect cloning engine. And what are we going to do about that? This thing is a set of, this slide is actually a set of news headlines, right, from various news sources like CNET and San Jose Mercury News, InfoWorld, all of our usual friendly guys. But what's scary about it is, governments, Massachusetts, China, Korea, etc. The consumer aspect of it is huge, right? They're trying to now get Linux inside various devices. I think Linux is inside TiVo, isn't it? Yeah, you guys should know this better than I should. Linux is inside TiVo. Like that should terrify you, right? And certainly big corporations that we've considered to be our partners, IBMs, Gateways, HPs, etc., are now giving more and more credence to Linux, and that's a huge threat. The other interesting thing that's happened is this. Raise your hand if you've been in one of those Mac stores in one of the malls or whatever. Okay? Next time I come talk to you guys, I want there to be all hands raised. Go there. Walk into go to, what's that place called? Bell Square or whatever? Yeah, my wife lives there. Go to Bell Square. Walk into the Mac store. And just hang out. Don't buy anything for crying out loud. Well, okay, those iPods are pretty cool. And those G5s those are pretty cool too. But don't expense it. But because that always looks really weird. But go in there and just hang out. And just listen to not only what the guys in the jeans and the black T-shirts, the uniform of the Apple Corporation, not just what they're saying, because they're saying all sorts of stuff. They're salesmen, basically. But listen to what the consumers are saying. Listen to what the people inside the store that are just talking to the guys in the jeans and the black T-shirts are asking about. Listen to their reactions when they see things on the screens, because they have this very interactive sales experience. It's not like going and buying books or something, right? I mean, it's like you go in there and you're hovering around something for longer than like 10 seconds, and pretty soon one of the jeans and black T-shirts comes up to you and doesn't say, are you interested in buying one of these? They say, have you seen this really cool feature with this? Right? Have you seen what it can do here? Has anyone showed you this? Right? They just suck you right in, man. It's unbelievable. But the thing is that the energy you feel in there is all excitement. It's all like, wow, that's really cool, or I didn't know PCs could do that. And I literally heard that in one of these stores. So it's this really high energy, exciting possibilities, opportunity kind of feeling inside those stores. And without stopping for a croissant or something, right, go straight to, I don't know, Circuit City or Best Buy or frickin' Sears or something, right? And go to the PC section. Walk right past the first thing they have, which is a nice Apple display to get people attracted to walking to the PC section at all. But go past that and go into to the real PC section, right? The IBM stuff, where they're selling typically compacts, a lot of compacts being sold in those kinds of stores, and hang around there and listen, and you'll have a much different experience. You'll hear the words virus while you're there, even though it's clearly not the CompUSA salesman's problem that some poor consumer has a virus on their machine, but you'll hear that word. You'll hear broken. Right? You'll hear, I bought a video camera and it's broken. I can't connect it to my PC. Right? You'll hear You'll hear some how do I's, but they're mostly, when you listen to them, they're mostly things like, geez, that should just work. You know, people shouldn't be struggling with how do I print a picture. Like, that's not what people at CompUSA should be hearing from consumers. So you have this very different experience. It's much more defensive, right? It's much more not about the creativity of what the PC's offering, but about how to get the thing to do what they know it can already do. Whereas the Apple experience is much more about, oh, look at all the cool things it can do I didn't even know it could do. Right? Very different experiences. And all right, am I really worried that Apple's going to take over like the industry in the next like year or something? No, of course not. But they're in the mall. Like, you know, I got this phone call from my wife, like, oh, I'm looking at this thing at the Apple Store, and it's really cool. I'm like, no, put the credit card down. I work at Microsoft. You just can't walk home with a G5. Like, it's just, somehow it's just mentally disturbing. You know, we'll go and we'll buy you a more, you know, powerful PC. But they're in the mall, and they're getting huge crowds. These pictures show, these are just a couple snapshots of, you know, what's going on inside stores. They're getting huge crowds, they're getting a lot of interest, and it is very possible they'll break past niche. Now, are they still fundamentally screwed up? Yeah. Do they get the developer ecosystem thing? Do they really push that hard? No. Do they still have these closed boxes that no one else can build cheaper? Yeah. I mean, so are they limiting themselves in a huge way? Absolutely. But they're kind of happy with the niche market they have. Does someone have a question?
I think we know our competitive threats. We talked about this for 10 minutes. I was just hoping
you want me to move along?
A little fast.
Sure.
If you don't mind.
No, I don't mind at all. So what's going to create the next inflection point, right? The platform. Innovation possibilities in the platform absolutely are going to create that next inflection point, the next possibility for growth. And that will drive the whole industry. It drives productivity. It drives revenue, not just for us, but for the industry as a whole. It drives IT purchasing and spending, etc. Fundamentally, we have to give people, though, the ability to do new things with the platform. And we have to also meet the competitive challenges around Linux and Apple, which is the last thing I'll say about Apple Corporation, for the gentleman on the table. So what is the next platform? And fundamentally, and Jim showed this in his slides at the PDC, and he shows a slide of, you know, DOS, Win16, Win32, and what they call WinFX, which I called Lappy here because we hadn't sort of released that as a code name. But WinFX, not to be confused with WinFS, is a code name now for the Longhorn APIs, the managed code framework around which we're declaring this new platform, this new set of capabilities. Within WinFX are these three fundamental pillars, Avalon, Indigo, and WinFS, around presentation, communication, and data. And for all three of those, there's really rich stories around, you know, what new things are going to be capable because these platform components are there than ever was possible previously. And it is about the industry. We're looking at these innovations not in the context of a customer asked us to, you know, make it easier to get down to registers inside a GPU or whatever. We're doing it because fundamentally we believe we have a technological basis that people can build new kinds of capabilities on, new kinds of applications on that weren't possible today. I was talking to Will Kennedy, he's the general manager of Outlook. He was the dev manager of Outlook for actually years. And I asked him a fairly simple question. I said, removing the memory problem of Win16, let's just forget that there's this huge memory problems with Win16. Could you have built Outlook 11 on Win16? And his answer is no. The system did not provide enough services for us to be able to build the application. And you know, of course, there's a whole bunch of drilling into what that actually means. But the basic gist is, while it's possible to have done some of the things very Outlook-like, the bar to create Outlook on Win16 was just so high. And it's a similar kind of thing. When we built Windows 95, I think there were some people in research actually thinking about this, something called Project X. But you know, no one was envisioning Outlook as the killer app or the Internet as the killer app for Windows 95. They just knew they were building this great platform that these killer apps would come. Similarly with WinFX and with Longhorn, hey, you know what? We're building this platform, and these great things will come along. So now down to the point of things. Why integrate storage as part of this? Why is WinFS one of the three pillars of this new managed code platform? There's a couple of reasons. One, more and more data is being born digitally every day. And in fact, in the conversation I had with Patrice right before we started, he's like, hey, I want to make it so that more data can be more relevant in this digital world and brought into WinFS intelligently. You know, the advent of things like digital photography or GPS chips that are now what? How expensive is a GPS chip now? Like 20 cents or something to put into some device that's going to record where you were. The internet and the whole business-to-business transaction processing, and even things like, you know, go back to your childhoods and you get the LL Bean, anyone LL Bean catalog? Is that familiar to anybody? Yeah. And you fill out the form in the middle, right? You'd write out like the things, I want this backpack and I want these, you know, boots and whatever else, and you'd put it in an envelope and you'd send it. And some person somewhere would do something with that, and that ranged everything from completely paper-based system of ordering to entering into some mainframe system where orders were processed, etc., at a warehouse. But now it's completely electronic. The idea of us taking a catalog and filling out a form in the middle of it is like completely foreign, you know. And so there's more and more of this data being born digitally every day, not just because of the advent in the consumer space, but also because of the internet and what that's meant to businesses and online ordering. Search is a huge problem. By some estimates, hours a day are being spent looking for things. And if you guys are any testament to that problem, I've encountered no less than 5 research projects around finding things in the course of my tenure in WinFS. And you know, the good news is you guys have done a lot of good thinking there. We've actually taken a lot of the schema requirements you guys have had and put them into the WinFS system. So nonetheless, that research is helping us. But it's clearly a huge problem, right? And you talk about productivity gains. What if you reduce that down from 2.5 hours down to 20 minutes a day? Do you think that would sell Windows, sell every product we ever spit out that's related to that? You bet it would, right? We wouldn't have a problem. Office 11, their biggest competitor, Office, I don't think it's even 10, I think it's 9. I think it's Office 9 is their biggest competitor. That's the thing they're after. Like, let's upgrade Office 9 users. That's our competitor, our way to make money. Well, you just kill that problem right away. You just remove that obstacle right away. If Office 12 locks into a system where search goes from 2.5 hours down to 10 minutes, right? And Office is part of that system. It just obviates that. You know, fortunately, technology supports these trends. The disk capacity growth is phenomenal. And Jim Gray's research on My Life, or actually it's Gordon Bell's research on My Life Bits, is only possible today because he's got huge hard drives he can put all this stuff on now. And that really wasn't even possible before. The terabyte project was this enormous undertaking at the time. My God, a terabyte of data, imagine it. Well, when we ship Longhorn, that will be the standard hard drive size, right? A terabyte of data, no problem. And you know, by that time, what? Digital cameras will be 20 megapixels, average consumer camera probably another 3 years, right? Roughly that, 15. So you guys are smart guys, come on, give me the number. What is it? 8? Fine. Whatever that is, how many megabytes is that per picture?
It's 4 megabytes compressed JPEG, 10 megabytes
raw. Yeah. So whatever that is, so several megabytes per picture. You take a few hundred pictures on a vacation, you can see the spacers add up. And that's not even counting digital video, which is incredibly space greedy. And I don't care how smart you guys get, it will always be space greedy. And you know, I have 3/4 of a terabyte of storage at home right now, and it's gone. And it's because of digital video. I mean, it just eats it like no tomorrow. It's ridiculous. So, but you know, this capacity is growing, and it'll be fairly cheap. The other one, of course, is WinFS. You know, we're going to build a system that understands data at a much richer level inside the operating system. So I have 2 slides here on benefits. One's about consumer benefits, and the story we tell, the consumer story we tell, is about find, relate, and act. So find everyone gets, and as Microsoft employees, if you haven't had the delightful experience of having someone at a party or at the line of Starbucks or whatever come to you and ask you, oh, you know, who are you? You know, where do you work? Blah, 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 and you tell them, like, oh, you work at Microsoft. Can you explain to me why I can barely remember something I saw on Google or on the web 3 months ago, and I go to Google and instantly I get the thing back. But I saved a document 2 days ago on my hard drive and I can't find it anywhere. Tell me why that is. If you haven't had that experience, go to more parties, I guess would be my answer to that, because you will. If you haven't, you will. And it's embarrassing in a way, right? But the problem is, of course, is we have pretty poor technology for indexing and categorizing and understanding what data is actually on the hard drive we don't expose it in all the right ways as well. So it's both the end user experience problem and a technology problem, which WinFS firmly is there to address. The second benefit we talk about is relate. And this is sort of like, if you ran into Patrice in the hallway and he said, hey, are you coming to the meeting tomorrow afternoon, the WinFS talk? You automatically in your mind have a whole set of data that you invent around what's related to that. Who's going to be there? What time is it? Where is it? Are there going to be slides presented? Am I going to take some ink notes that I'm going to want to save? And so you automatically in your mind, and if someone asks you a week from now, hey, did you go to the presentation last week? You automatically associate all these relationships in your head automatically. The computer knows nothing about these things. Like the computer can't even tell you who your spouse is, much less where your meeting notes are from a meeting 3 weeks ago. In WinFS, the data model we have has this end-user benefit around relate. It understands relationships between things. It's actually a fundamental concept in our data model constructs themselves. And then the last one's around act. We believe it's not enough just to have data sitting around in some big hard drive somewhere, or even in really, really smart B trees. We think that data has to be acted upon, and there's kind of two angles to that. One is around synchronization and the ability to keep data moving between the places it needs to be and having the data available anytime, anywhere, any place you want it to be. And also around having data take action. So both from an end-user perspective and from a developer's perspective. From an end-user perspective, it's like, how many of you use Outlook rules today to deal with your mail? The majority of you. Imagine applying it to every piece of information you ever get, right? That same power, that same ability to say, these are the projects I care about the most, or these are the people whom I need to communicate with at the highest priority. And whatever it is, if it's documents coming in through synchronization, or if it's IM sessions, or if it's email, or if it's photographs that someone sent me, or whatever, I want to apply these same kinds of rules to these same kinds of heuristics and say, this is how I want my stuff dealt with. It's contextual, so it understands things like that I'm in full screen mode, and even though Patrice is one of my top buddies, and wherever I am, he can interrupt me and we'll have an IM chat. Okay, I'm presenting. I don't want the really smart researcher has signed in to appear up there on stage. So it understands context, and you can program these as a developer. The other way to look at this is as from a developer standpoint, where don't you want to be able to tap into data even though your app isn't necessarily running at that moment, and say, when data like this happens, when something like this occurs, I want my app to do the following things. I want, like one of the examples we give is around some AutoCAD engineering sort of management app, right? And someone's gone off to the site visit, and they've measured something, and some measurement came in incorrectly. I'm a drafts person. Imagine me being able to write rules, or the application being able to author action rules that say, when measurements of a certain class come in differently, create a task on this person's task list for them to go and make the appropriate adjustments in their plans. The developer benefits, and you'll see shades of this at the PDC news, the press we got. The first thing we're trying to communicate to PDC was, we're not breaking the world, right? And that message had to come through loud and clear about WinFS. We literally support the Win32 APIs. You literally can do find first, find next, and create file and get back file handles through WinFS. And the trick we're employing there to not screw this up like it's been screwed up in the past is we're so deeply married to NTFS that when you ask us for a file handle, we give you a file handle. We don't give you some implementation that's like a file handle. No, we give you the real McCoy. So even if you use files, you're a developer, you still use your file formats, the system can provide you in your application more benefits than it could before, because you still get these capabilities around finding and relating and acting. So I can still have a PDF document. I can still create relationships between that and other items in the system. I can still do rich search on it. And I can still write rules that allow you to act on it, even without changing the file format. If you have a file format that's not standard, what we call quote-unquote standard, which is OLE doc properties, media types like JPEGs, EXIF headers, stuff like that, then you can provide us with a little bit of code so that you can help us bridge the world between your opaque file stream we know nothing about and our structured store that provides all the metadata upon which you do searches and relations and whatever else, right? The second depth of benefits is around using the Windows types. Windows is going to ship with the notion of what a photograph is, or what a location is, or what a contact is, or what a calendar item is, or a mail message, or a task, or etc. So we have these Windows types built in. And as a developer, you can look at this in one of two ways. The first way you can look at it is, hey, I'm not all about that. Like, I'm not a contact management application. I'm just Amazon.com's rich client application. One of the demos that Jim showed at the PDC was Amazon.com prototype. There was a rich click once client that came down and gave this whole set of offline capabilities and all this other really cool stuff. It's actually a really slick demo. If you haven't seen it, it's worth going back to the PDC streams and watching it. But Amazon.com, in the sample, the app they have, the demo they have, they let you, you're shopping for, I forget the scenario is, you're shopping for a present for your mom or something, right? And you're narrowing it down, you're working offline, you're like on a plane or something, right? And you find the perfect gift, and you're all excited, and you're like, okay, I want to get this thing shipped to my mom. So you go to the People Picker, which is a standard Windows piece of contact management UI, and you find your mom, and you select it. Now, from Amazon's perspective, they just want contacts to be contacts, right? They don't care about contacts. All they want to do is pull the shipping address out of a contact. So from a certain perspective, if you're not all about that type, it's just the world's just the same to you. It's just whatever. It's just there's this notion of contacts or calendar items or whatever, and there's a set of operations and methods against them, and you can just use them. The other way to look at this is, let's say you are Eudora or something that deeply cares about mail messages or contacts or whatever, right? You're a contact management app. Well, you get to really deeply embrace these types, extend them both with properties and with business logic and side effects so that instances of that Windows class, like a contact, that are owned by your application, you completely own, basically. Yes, you have to support. If you don't, you'd have to not take over our properties and our methods that we define in Windows, but if you do take them over, you have to support them. So you have to still be able to delete a calendar item, for example, right? But if you do that, you have total control over what happens in that case. And so we've walked this very fine line between having ubiquity and having apps be able to add this sort of domain-specific value. And this last thing is, it's a database underneath there. Use it, right? We instead of saying create table, we have this thing called create item type, right? So we have a different schema definition language, different DDL, if you will, and a different DML. But it's still a relational database underneath there, and you can do joins on it, and you can create views, and you can structure the data as you need to have it structured. So use it as such. One of the pitches we make, and we haven't actually literally gone down to into it yet, but we will. We want them to get rid of their, Quicken's file, whatever that thing's called, QBW, is that what it's called? File, whatever that thing's called. And we want them to build items. We want them to build the check item and extend contacts to be the payee item type and build the bank statement item type, etc. And really build a system on WinFS and extend the shell in the right ways, etc. And we believe there's a ton of benefits they get as developers, both because we've got a database, they don't have to build one, and because we think it gives their users better opportunities to relate things and to show things in the shell and integrate their user experience in other places. The example I give is, imagine if Quicken really did do this, right? You could go to, one example I give is, right now, if you get this weird phone call from your bank, which occasionally you get, like, we lost your mother's maiden name or something, right? And the lady's on the phone calling you, leave a message, and she's like, so please call us back at the bank at 45. You're like, what was the phone number again? And so you can go to the web, you can look up the phone number, or you can go into Quicken, because you have all that account information in Quicken. And try doing this at home. It's like 15, 20 clicks away to find a phone number for some contact you have in your financial management app. But imagine that they extend Windows, so it's just there in your contacts. You just ask for first tech or whatever, and boom, the number comes back. So those kinds of benefits as well as relationship kinds of things. Imagine that you could, look up the receipts for every Christmas present you've ever given your mom in your life, right? I mean, that kind of thing is possible when you're using the WinFS system, you're using the Windows types in conjunction. I've talked through a lot of these scenarios in the past, and I think I've touched on a bunch of them while we've talked here, but contacts, of course, is a huge deal. The ability, right now, when someone sends you a piece of mail and says, oh, I got a new cell phone, or, oh, I just switched ISPs, here's my new email address. How many places you got to go, right? You got to go to your IM software, you got to go to Outlook, you got to go to your Hotmail account right online to change the online address it has from that little list box you can just use in Hotmail. So there's all these places you got to go today. Imagine you don't have to worry about that anymore. In fact, taking that even further, imagine you don't have to get the mail anymore because this person's in your group of family or friends contacts, and when they change their information, you get that synchronized. That appears in all the right places, on your phone, in your Hotmail list box, in your IM software, etc. It just happens. You don't have to think about it anymore. The other day I had this really weird, I have a, one of these smartphones, one of these Microsoft smartphone things, and it synchronizes over GPRS or whatever protocol they're using to exchange, right? So I can actually manage my contacts in one place in Outlook, and it's a pretty good experience. And the other day, I had to pick up the phone, an analog phone, and type in a phone number. It was really, because I'm also using that software, what's that called, ET phone here? The phone software we have here at Microsoft. So you just right-click on contacts and it dials the phone numbers on your speakerphone. I had to pick up the phone and actually manually dial a number. It was really weird. I mean, I felt like I was punching in an IP address or something, And it started to become so foreign, like, God, it's so archaic to memorize these 10 digits, and that's how you reach out to people. And WinFS actually helps that ecosystem around having contacts built up in Windows. So all applications can use that as its repository for where that stuff is kept, and use it as a way to reach out and find that information. Documents. Yeah, question?
Feel free to say, I'm going to deal with this later, but the comment you just made about all applications and all of this data, this looks like virus hell.
Yeah.
Or it looks like you're going to lock everything down like Outlook does, and then anytime I try and use this stuff, the person's going to be clicking through a million boxes, which we don't want either.
Yeah, so you're actually attacking trustworthiness from two angles. One angle is how are we going to prevent WinFS from being the world's greatest virus spreader technology ever? Because that's actually, in some ways, almost a design point. We'll talk about that in a second. And then the other one is Outlook right now, when I even write a macro within Outlook, I get these horrendous dialogues that say, hey, something's trying to talk to your email addresses. How many MITs do you want that to go on for? It's this pretty obtrusive experience. I won't necessarily directly talk about those later, so let me talk to them now. The virus thing, we're very worried about. Very, very worried about. In fact, this middle scenario, I talk about documents just being sort of out there, and imagine knowledge workers being able to create solutions for themselves that IT involved in a notes-like way, if you will, and just saying, Patrice and Surja, which I think left, these guys are part of my working group. I just want the data just to flow, and whatever it is they're working on, that's in this sort of category of this data, it kind of comes to me, and whatever I'm working on goes to them, and it just kind of happens whenever I'm connected, kind of like Outlook 11 works today. So there's two. The biggest aspect of that is about code and when we can install code. And WinFS, in fact, we've had many a shouting match with our chairman. Right? Is he our chairman? Yeah, he's still our chairman. Our chief software architect about this very point of WinFS will not automatically install schemas. Like, period. We're not going to install code. And some of the scenarios even call for things like, geez, I create the solution. I drag and drop some items of this type up to a server, and the server should just reach down to the client, grab the code, and auto-install it. And that raised the hairs in the back of my neck. That scares me mindlessly, right? We cannot become the world's greatest virus spreader. And where we're drawing that line is around scheme installation, because we use the word scheme installation to describe all code that interacts with WinFS. Installation. We're calling that an app problem, not a system problem. Now, there's a lot of thinking going around distributing stuff as apps in Windows and enterprises and to consumers, etc. So we'll dock into that, but we're not going to automatically install anything for anyone. The other side of that is around trustworthiness. And there's a hard problem still left in Windows around application trust. So for managed code, we have code access security. It actually works pretty well. And you can really say, this piece of code can do the following things or can access the following resources. We're trying to bake that down lower into the system, into the Windows security model, so that you can do things like the shell and Outlook have access to all calendar data for this user. For this user, the shell and Eudora have access to all contact information or whatever. And the user experience around opening up those ACLs so that more apps can see that stuff, we're working through, but But fundamentally, we're trying to provide a lower level security semantics so that we can protect that data. And then there's user experience problem, making sure that we can free up or open up access to applications that are trusted. And part of that will be through how Windows solves this application security model through certificates and whatever else. So you can say things like, today you go up to, install a fresh machine, go up to MSW, and you get a dialog that says, hey, some thing's trying to download itself and install into IE for you from Microsoft Corporation internal, right? It's the ticker control, whatever it is that's on MSW. And then you get a box that says, just trust Microsoft Corporation internal. Like whatever HR apps and OTG apps, whatever else junk they want to install, just let them do it, right? So similar model you can say with the code access, with the app security stuff, we're trying to have the same kind of experience where you can just say, look, I trust my own corporation. I trust the following vendors like Microsoft, Adobe, Intuit, or whatever. But I don't trust random things from the web. And to allow that to become the security system. So I keep moving. All right, so finally, what is WinFS? This is the vision statement we have. WinFS is the active storage platform for organizing, searching, and sharing all data. And we do mean all data. We mean whether it's formally structured data, like contact is, semi-structured, like the XML inside the bodies of documents, or unstructured data, like the stream of ones and zeros you feed to a JPEG algorithm to put, pixels on the screen, right? We believe we have a system that will store all data and has the ability to add value to all those kinds of data. It is where all end-user data lives in Longhorn. So to wit that point, when you upgrade from XP to Longhorn, the stuff that's inside my documents, right, the documents and settings directory, we suck it into WinFS automatically. And we inspect it, we create structured data properties around it, we organize it, and we put it fundamentally in WinFS from the get-go.
Wait, do you just basically index it?
No. It's WinFS.
There's property promotion, but it's still indexing, isn't it? I mean, the data isn't stored in SQL. It's stored in the file system.
Yes and no. So WinFS. So on a pure upgrade experience, and you've done nothing with the system, there is no data there beyond file streams themselves. So there's data that's in the file stream. We do have a metadata handling mechanism, what you call file promotion, that's able to look at data inside the file stream, put it inside the structured store. But the difference between us just being an indexer, and we do index the data and whatever else. So yeah, you can do queries and they're efficient, blah, 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 blah. We have full text indexing, integration, whatever else. That's all fine. But the difference between us just being an indexer versus us actually being a store is I can then walk up through the Longhorn APIs, through the system.storage namespace, which is where the WinFS APIs live, and I can do things like change the title of a document. And that actually gets changed. And we have the metadata handlers are bidirectional, so we can go in and demote the data back down into the file stream.
File name, let's view that as metadata.
Sorry, what?
If we view file name as metadata, what else is stored that is data? Like, I thought it was all under the secret share, the whack, question mark, something random with name.
No, I'm not sure.
Like the actual data. Like you're saying the doc data is in SQL.
Yeah, so the file streams are stored and controlled completely by WinFS. It's not SQL. Just clarify that. So the file streams are completely under our control. The namespace is completely under our control. I can create additional data. I can add properties to documents, and if they can't get demoted, oh well, they don't get demoted in the file stream.
I think what he's asking is, so I have a .foo file. You don't know anything about the .foo file except whatever's on the NT property.
Right.
Okay, so now I'm promoting my documents, and there's a .foo in there. Okay, and now my old app that knows about .foos goes and says, I want to open a .foo. Is it sucking the same bits off the disk that were in there, or have you moved the .foo actually into your database and it no longer exists on the disk in that same location, the .foo?
Okay, so
is that correct?
I can explain that, and then we can keep going. This is actually a fairly important point. When we move the thing into WinFS, we do move the location of the file stream. It does get moved. It's completely under our control at that point. We do have integration down with NTFS so that if something comes along and asks us for C:/documents and settings /Quentin/my document /foo.foo, we can answer that call. We know where that file stream is, and we can give that file stream back. And we can make it look and appear and seem like the legacy applications that the file stream just is where it used to be and everything's fine, right? So they're not impacted by that. And when they ask, they get back the file stream itself. Now, Word documents, for example, will have, because they're OLE docs, if that made any sense. They're using OLE doc properties, which is a standard thing that we know about. We have promoters and demoters built into the system so that when we do that import, we move the document from NTFS into WinFS, we go and we ferret out all the metadata we can, titles, authors, creation dates, whatever other metadata is declared, keywords, etc. And we put that up in the structured store, and then additional data can be created inside WinFS around that document that doesn't necessarily always get demoted back down to the file format. Does that make sense? So let me keep going, and we'll see where we land on questions for this one. It's a data model, so it's built on the relational model. It's built on the code asset we have that SQL uses as well. I was careful to say WinFS is not SQL because it kind of is and kind of isn't. And you think of it this way: Rob Short's team, you guys familiar with Rob Short's team, base kernel guys? They have this code asset called the kernel that they work on, and they take parts of that at any given moment, give them to the Windows client to ship, and they take parts of that at any given moment, give them to Windows Server to ship. So at any given time, the client and the server actually have slightly different versions of the kernel. That's just kind of the way things have happened over time. Similarly, Dave Campbell's guys in the SQL organization own the relational engine asset, and they're working on a big set of code there, and some of that code gets delivered to Yukon, some of that code gets delivered to WinFS. But the underlying bits of, managing and balancing B trees and doing the algebraizer and the query processor and stuff like that, that's the same code. I mean, it's the same asset we're using in both places. So there definitely is a relational model there. There definitely is the real SQL engine there. We've built this data model on top, which I'll describe in a minute. But we have this notion of an item and strong identity and relationships and these semantics around things like copy and move and restore and synchronize and whatever else. They're different than just rows in a database. A set of services that make data active. So I talked about synchronization. Info agent's also part of this vision as well. The ability to take action on data. And then we have the Windows schemas themselves, things like contacts, calendar items, etc. These are real notions that are built and baked into Windows. It's married to a new shell, so that's actually a big deal. So if you haven't seen Hillel Cooperman's demos of the Windows shell lately, meaning last like 2 months, you should, because they have this whole new user model around finding and managing and dealing with your information, the stuff that you have, whether it be file-backed or not. They're all items to the shell. A lot of things we're saying internally is it's really hard. WinFS a year ago was still, we didn't have the data model locked down. We didn't know what we were doing exactly. And we've made a huge amount of progress. When we were able to go to the PC, we have this whole new UDT-based implementation coming in to Longhorn tree right now. And it's been, a difficult thing to put together, but we actually think we have a fairly good beat on it at this point. So the things it's not, and certainly it's not done. We're looking at the end of this year getting done with the innovations inside WinFS so that we can answer most questions that come up, like how do we install schemas, or how do we protect the privacy of email addresses, or another hard problem might be, what are we doing about the seams between the traditional relational model, tables, rows, etc., and WinFS, especially when we have to deliver all this stuff in a single cohesive data platform one day, the thing that comes after Yukon. What's that going to look like? How's that going to work? And we're not ignorant of projects of the past, right? There have been no less than 5 integrated storage efforts at Microsoft in the past several years. And there's a couple of key mistakes that we think we know how to avoid this time around. One of them is that the relational engine itself is mature enough for actually to build on, to use and leverage in this way. Another is like this file stream support. Like, we're not inventing or trying to replicate the file stream semantics. We're letting NTFS take care of that and handle that. And the way we've designed the proc takes into account some of these design mistakes that have been made, and we're trying to do a better job. And this last thing, we're not the thing that's going to make Longhorn slip in the next decade, I assure you. We are at this point have made fairly good progress. We're on track for beta 1. We can see the light at the end of the tunnel fairly easily. So I'm going to skip this slide and actually go into the details here. The data model, the first thing to know about data model is items. Items have strong identity. Items are the things that are the atomic units that you now do things with. You copy them, you program to them, you back them up, you serialize them in and out of the store. Items are the thing. They're the new thing. Relationships are another huge part of the data model. And we have a few different kinds of relationships. One is, a few different classes, I should say. One is about explicit relationships between things for containment, for organization. So foldering is an example of this. And foldering is a relationship between the thing that's in a folder and the folder itself. Right? It's an explicit kind of relationship. There's other kinds of explicit relationships that declare connections between things. So for example, a contact and a document are connected through an author relationship. That contact is the author of that document. And so there's a relationship there. And it's actually a physical thing you can find in a link table somewhere inside the WinFS tables, inside the data model. And then there's implicit kinds of relationships like basically what joins do, right? What joins give you. It's the ability to say, hey, I want to find all the documents that were sent to me in the past week that were authored by people whose last name is Fu. Okay, well, that's a join, and that's an implicit kind of relationship between these two things. Let's see. I think I actually have a couple examples of that. Let's just roll through that. So synchronization is one of these parts of the platform that we think is really important that actually does change things. So we're building sync-in from the ground up, and all the way down to the schema definition, sync surfaces itself. So inside the schema itself, you can declare change units. So certain change units, like look at certain properties like subject of a meeting. Subject of a meeting you can change independently of any other part of the meeting. That doesn't matter. That's fine. So that's a change unit. You declare that as a change unit. The beginning and end time of a meeting, you don't want those changing independently of each other. You kind of want those changing as a unit, so you declare that as a single change in the schema. Similarly, because we have these change units, or not similarly, but in relation, because we have these relationships, or because we have these change units inside synchronization, when multiple pieces of data are being worked on independently and then synchronized, we respect those change units. We can merge these changes in much more easily by definition of the schema design in the first place. The first point of extensibility inside synchronization beyond designing schemas then is conflict resolution handling. So when we do encounter a conflict between 2 points inside a single item, inside a change unit, you can provide some code that says, I'm really smart about dealing with conflicts of this nature, of this schema, of this property. When that happens, let me know and I'll run some code and I'll try to do something smart about it. We'll have some things built in, all the dumb ones like last writer wins, right, policy and stuff like that. But we're going to allow developers to provide us more intelligence around those things. And then sort of the third area to plug in as a developer is around sync adapters. As much as we like to fantasize otherwise, all the data won't be in WinFS the moment we ship Longhorn, right? And there's data that's just out there somewhere in a variety of different legacy backend stores and other stores that are going to live on probably forever. So the synchronization engine allows you to sort of dock in and get lowest level access to how change units are being discovered and understood and synchronized so you can go and plug into some other system. The approach we have, it's multi-master replication. We're Doug, what's his name? Terry. Terry. Yeah, thank you. Is working with us a ton on our synchronization algorithms. And in fact, we look at synchronization as 3 problems in a stack. There's a user experience problem about how do I declare what I want to have synced with who. How do I create the pool of pictures I'm going to share with my mom? What's the user experience around that? When I plug into a network, how does it impact things? Where do I get to see progress in the UI? All that stuff. There's a lowest level problem, which is on the network. How do I know that the network's there to use? And how do I get across firewalls so I can make consumer-to-consumer scenarios work? Or how do I leverage an enterprise component of Longhorn server so that I can allow enterprise-to-enterprise synchronization relationships to happen and to be controlled and policed and policed by IT departments, right? So there's sort of that lower network layer of stuff. And then there's the middle. This is where Doug's helping us around, okay, figuring out what's changed and what to do is really hard. And so the WinFS team, that's where we're spending all of our effort, is around getting these algorithms right. And we have this fairly sophisticated thing about knowledge and change units and all this stuff that this whole thing's built around. And we're making pretty good progress on that. Question?
I have a question on the enterprise CRM synchronization, because it was a question I wanted to ask earlier, but it's good that it's on your slide. Because the CRM apps are all about contact management. So we are now providing a very rich API to manage contacts in our platform.
Yep.
But it's mostly at the desktop level, I guess, as individual users. So here you're talking about synchronizing with the server-side enterprise CRM app, and what are we going to provide, and what does that mean? I mean, is that going to change the equation a little bit at all?
Okay, the question was about enterprise CRM and what are we really doing for them, and how do they plug into us, and what do we really expect them to do? I think that's kind of the nature of the question. All right, so let me start with a couple of things. One, even though we don't have declared detailed plans for what WinFS on a server means and what parts of that are in Windows versus in MS SQL Server, the product itself, and how does it all work, there will be a server component to this. So CRM applications, at some point, we'll be able to build the server parts of our apps on WinFS itself and take advantage of the Windows types, etc. Underlying all that is extensions and the ability to extend the data model and the data items that are defined by Windows or even by other ISVs. So for any type in the system, any type of item or relationship, you can say, that's great, you've defined the contact type, but I need the following additional class that defines also what it means to be a contact for me. And I want to be able to define better business logic around, better code around what it means to delete a contact, or I am a contact, or I also want to define these new additional methods, like bill a contact or something, right? So there's actually a fairly deep level of extensibility we're going to allow people to take over instances, if you will, within the Windows type. So we haven't actually vetted this out with the CRM vendors, per se, yet, because we're still kind of crawl, walk, run around here a little bit. But at some point, we'll actually be able to go to them and say, here's what it means to be a Windows contact. Here are your extensibility points. Tell us if there's anything else that you need. And we think right now the answer is no, because we did early research on that, especially actually specifically on this point, with them about February or March. And we got the crap kicked out of us because we weren't going to allow synchronous business logic handlers, and we weren't going to allow extensions of a certain class, and it was not as good a story as it needed to be. So we think we've actually filled up all the right gaps. Around synchronization, we really do hope that for their desktop applications, the parts of the CRM apps that are the desktop components that people use, that their end users really use, that they're allowed to synchronize back to back-end data sources to populate those contacts and to even create new types like the request for pricing or something, right? And that's a new type in the system, and they get to synchronize that from the CRM back-end systems, etc. And they can take advantage of our synchronization infrastructure to help them do that and build on the networking stuff we have around Indigo, etc.
So this is kind of a related question. Let's just take the Microsoft Gal. Would you imagine that would be synced to my contacts?
Or built on WinFS?
Built on maybe built on WinFS, but more from the user's point of view. Is it on my local store?
Yeah.
Get the local GL, or is that like the US?
Yeah. So the question was about the GAL, and that's a great question because it actually has sufficient level of complexity to make it an interesting answer. In an ideal world, fast forward in the future N years, the identity services, which is the replacement for the Active Directory in the fullness of time, is built entirely on the WinFS server thing, whatever that is. And so they've done the right changes to the contact schema types and all that stuff so that the GAL really is built, if you will, around WinFS. And then you can set up your desktop to synchronize the entire GAL down so you have all your enterprise contacts on your local machine. And Outlook already does this. So when I first say it to some people, they're like, oh my God, all that data. That's nothing. On a terabyte drive, you're worried about 50,000 contacts? Give me a break, right? Hold on, let me finish, and then I'll get to you. So you'll be able to set that up. That scenario will work. Today, the GAL isn't really... one of the things we considered is, can we build a synchronization adapter to go and to effectively give the same user experience? And the answer is yes, but the user experience and the problems with how the GAL or how Active Directory change management works means that we can't effectively synchronize the whole GAL, because the way the AD infrastructure works, it's actually very expensive on the network and in processing in order to do that. So the user experience is instead going to be around particular contexts. It's going to be, I care about the following 10 people, or the following people just in my part of the organization, or 2 levels above me, or whatever, some scoping mechanism, and then they'll set up the synchronization relationship and build a sync adapter back to AD. In fact, we have a sync adapter up and running to AD that does this. But you can't do it for all contexts because there's a huge set of costs that occur, both in the back end to process changes and on the network, because it's all sort of not designed for this exactly. And the way the Outlook has solved this today is Exchange goes and does this work and reformats into a different data structure that can then be more granularly synchronized down to clients. So one possibility we may have in the Longhorn server time frame is to build a WinFS head, if you will, on AD to do exactly the same thing. So end users can select more context from AD they want to have synchronized down, and it goes against the WinFS head, not against AD directly. So there's a sort of spectrum of possibilities there, and similar to the CRM question, we think that people can pick and choose which of those options they need to go down based on what they actually have to work with. You had a follow-up question, or?
Oh, you covered everything. I was just going to say, having worked on it, the problem isn't storage, it was bandwidth. And Outlook, their offline address book format is brutally compressed, and you can't come close using something that's going to be a richer store.
Yeah. So there's, and that's one of the things we're working through with Outlook right now is around synchronization and how compact we're able to make changes. So the network's going to be somewhat efficient. I'll go over here.
This isn't a synchronization-related question specifically, but if you're migrating the data out of the file system at some level into WinFS, into a store, how do you ensure performance for those applications that really need, like SQL Server or Photoshop or somebody like that? This really does a lot of I/O.
So the question was of perf and about I/O. So because of the way we've implemented it, and in fact our demos today, we bring up Windows Media Player and we play this MPEG file, and it's flawless. It's like jitter-free and blah, blah, blah. And it's because when you come, you ask for a file handle, if you've done the create file, we give you a real file, and we're not in the way anymore at that point. So that little performance, we're great on, because it's not us, right? We're actually out of the way at that point. Find first, find next, we're worried about that performance because there's more lookups we have to do, but the worry translates to a lot of aggressive caching, and the SQL guys and the file system guys that we have in the SQL group that are building this stuff, they know how to do that. So we're not worried about that either. Write performance is where things are actually trickier, because now when you take something and you write it back, we have to update indices, we have to update tables where data lives, we have to run through this promotion process to get structured data out of the file stream if that's what we're doing. And so that we're looking at pretty closely, but bulk import really is where we're going to focus, making sure that write performance works really well. So imagine the scenarios of taking 100 photographs off a camera and dumping them into the store. We got to make that fast, and even if it means we have background processes doing the catch-up work, right, and creating and updating the indices in the background, etc. And then there's more complexities around that if you really want to wallow into the details of, okay, should we be doing that kind of lazy promotion and index updates when you're on battery save mode, or should we defer that stuff to when they're plugged back in? And so there's a fair amount of complexity around where and how and when we choose to use what kinds of cycles. But yeah, we're working on that stuff.
Does the design have the concept of, let's say, affect a particular item, and it's, I don't know, let's take a contact. Is there a concept of plugging in code so that, like, on the event that some application actually looks at the contact, then the code can say, oh, I know that someone wants this information, and actually I'm going to go fetch to some remote location and get more updates?
Yes, the question was, is there some way so that when an application comes and asks for data out of WinFS, some other app can be in the middle of that and say, no, I'm really going to go get the information from where it really lives.
Right, and then maybe stick it in WinFS.
And then maybe stick in WinFS, whatever else that's caching optimization, if you will. The answer in 1.0 is no. So We've thought a lot about building a provider model onto the API so that, I mean, it's really useful, right? Like, imagine being Novell. You'd love to build the contact provider into the WinFS API so that the people picker and the shell can work against Novell directories. Just out of scope for 1.0. We want to do it in long term. In fact, it was on the books for a while in 1.0, but we just can't. We had to cut something. That's one of the casualties of that attrition, that war of attrition. Question.
I'm trying to classify this thing. Is it an API or a driver or a distributed application?
WinFS?
Yeah.
It's not a driver. I know that much. It's not an app per se. Well, Ziggle guys call it an app because that's where they live and the stack is below, so everything above them is called an application.
Right.
The shell certainly calls it a system component, a subsystem thing, a platform thing. It has APIs, but it's fundamentally a storage. It's a system service that stores data and gives you APIs to access that data.
Not distributed? You mentioned the server components.
It depends what you mean by distributed. Can I, for example, take a couple examples. We built synchronization in to allow data to be distributed. We have semantics in the API so that you can, instead of opening just one store and programming against that one store, you can open up multiple stores. And you can say, hey, I want to find all the contacts whose last name is, Clark on all these stores. I'm going to get back that set of objects. I'm going to do some operations on that and do some things, and that goes back. So that we definitely have support for at the API layer. Other things like automatic partitioning, clustering, that kind of stuff, we'll worry about when we worry about the server version. We're just not there yet. So in some ways it is, some ways it isn't. So let me move past this slide, and then we'll take more questions. And I promise I'll end relatively soon, because we're pretty close. Notifications, this is the info agent stuff I talked about, the ability to write basic rules that say things like, hey, when a phone call comes in from a customer who's marked as high priority, and I'm in a meeting, I want you to auto-reply back with a time that I'll be able to call them back based on my free busy schedule, and I want you to set up a reminder on my calendar to remind me to call that person. Authorable rule in WinFS, in theory. And the shell is building, of course, all the user experience around that.
I'm sorry. Are you using the info agent on the client or on a server?
On the client. Well, ultimately in both places. But info agent is part of WinFS, which is part of the Longhorn client in the first version. So you'll be able to author and run these rules locally. In some future where we have WinFS running on the server, you'll be able to similarly say, I have this server data I'm also interested in. I want to write these rules about it, and I want you to run the rules wherever it is that the rules need to be run in order to efficiently work out, right? So they can run in both places where WinFS lives. For ISVs, I've talked about most of this stuff, but as a developer, you can plug in a bunch of different ways. One, of course, you can write to the objects. You can do things like get a shipping address from a contact or create a calendar appointment. You can extend the Windows types. You can say, yeah, I like your context, but I need the following additional properties, or I want to take over the following behaviors and that kind of thing. 3, you can create whole new types. You can say, I love your Windows types, but I need the check type. I need the request for proposal type. I need the sprocket type, or whatever it is that you're dealing with. 4, you can leverage info agents. You can build these rules. You can have your application as part of these rules also inform what these rules do, inform context. 4, you can build sync adapters, build custom conflict resolution handlers, and just use synchronization as a model. One of the demos we do is about this engineering app. I think I mentioned this AutoCAD kind of management app, and one user goes out to a site and they take measurements and they write meeting notes and they do all this stuff and they change the data. They get back to their corporate environment. Synchronization just happens, and the app on some other user's desktop notices these changes and does interesting things. I mean, you can build these distributed apps without having to really think too much about it, right? You don't have to, okay, now I'm going to call the web service, but I need to recognize when the network's there, so I'm going to tap into that API. Like, forget that. Just watch the data, and the data will take care of itself. 5, add in store logic. This is about extending the types that we have, and then, of course, writing file promoters. And these are, I should say, actually, metadata handlers, because they're bidirectional, right? I said before, I can walk up to the WinFS APIs, do some interesting query to find some set of documents. I can change their titles I can change their titles from something to something else, or I can change who authored them or whatever else. And the metadata handlers take those changes that occurred through the APIs in the structured store and put them back down in the file streams. And of course, not every property this will work for. We schematize that behavior and whatever else. That's the basic gist. Why this time is different? Well, first of all, we're looking at the whole system. So, the shell, what the user experience needs to be, what Outlook would need to do, all the stuff is happening concurrently, what the development experience needs to be. And a lot of these integrated storage efforts have only tackled one small part of the problem at a time and not thought through what it means to have these other parts affected and what that means to the system. So that's one advantage we can have out of the gates. Two, we don't have to invent the whole world. We already have the CLR, so we have a way to run code safely inside the process if they need to change our behavior somewhere. That didn't exist before. I mean, that's like driver hell at that point if you're using native code.
I'm sorry, so are you writing, is this written in C#?
Pieces of it are, yeah. I mean, the SQL engine in and of itself is, I don't even know what it is. I assume it's still just C, maybe C++, I don't know. But it's native code. The engine itself is native code. A lot of the WinFS data model isms, the things that we do to manage the data inside WinFS, are written actually in managed code. The entire way you plug into WinFS is all managed code. In fact, there's native support through interop. And you can use com interop to get to manage APIs through native code. That's our entire managed code support. Everything we do, promoters, synchronization handlers, all the API services themselves, all of it's managed code. You write entirely to WinFS in managed code. We have a higher level of commitment. Certainly, as I say, this is not without its moments of Gates standing up on his conference room table and telling us we're all a bunch of idiots. But nonetheless, these guys are all deeply bought in, and it's caused Outlook to get very committed, and it means we have the rest of that whole ecosystem being worked on at once. We have a bunch of key technical decisions that we've gotten right, actually. Like the file stream support. Someone asked a question about performance, I/O performance on a file stream. Well, I can only do that because it's really NTFS there, and we've made certain decisions about how it's implemented so that we don't have to repeat some mistakes I've made in the past. And then I got all these relational nerds. Right? I got Spiro, we got Pedro, we got Anil Nori, who came from Acera, who was at Oracle before that, and DEC before that, who's built applications on relational databases in the past and built Oracle. Worked on Oracle's database for a while. Dave Campbell, James Hamilton, and we actually have, if I'd updated these slides since I presented them previously, I would have added the folks from research that we have helping us as well, like Doug and Serge that's working on with dynamic indexing. And we have this interesting user problem, right? Like, if you're developing an app on SQL, you can kind of predict what your app's going to do. You can predict, oh, I need the data, and I need this data to be indexed because this is a view in my application. Well, in Longhorn, an end user can say, for all photographs, I want to add the grass density property, and I want it to be evaluated between 1 and 10. How much grass there is in the picture, and I want libraries, I want stacks, and I want everything indexed by how much grass there is in the picture. And the shell allows this. Now, if we're not smart enough about recognizing that the system keeps sending us queries for, sorted by grass type or whatever it is, then our performance could be very bad. So we're working on technology to do dynamic indexing based on the kinds of queries we're getting, and to age out old indices and whatever else. And we're getting help from research on that as well. And the rest of the stuff is just about, what's the message? Why is it so cool? I mean, first of all, working WinFS is just a ton of fun because we're changing the way end users are going to deal with information forever. And it's fairly high stakes, right? We get it wrong and we've really screwed up, right? And you can kiss all those stock awards goodbye. But if we get it right, we change computing for the next 20 years, right? Or 30 years. How long has first find next been around? Probably, 28, something like that, right? Long time. And the opportunity we have here to fundamentally give people a much more powerful personal computer is just phenomenal. And the excitement around that. So one of the things I had to do with PC was talk to press. I did like 7 or 8 press interviews, and it was so easy to relate this back to them because you can say things to them like, because they're all madly taking notes, in Word or whatever. Oh, what are you using? Oh, I'm using Word. Okay, great. So what happens when you go back to your office? Oh, well, I've got to write up this trip report, and I've got to take this Word document, I've got to send it out in mail, and I've got to do all these other things, and sometimes I forget who really needs to get the mail, blah, blah, blah. And so I'm able to sort of craft a story around what the world could look like for them if they had WinFS, around having these synchronization peer groups they just share the data with, around how the metadata will be there. We'll be able to index the stuff that's inside there very easily. They'll be able to find things based on when they were. So if they don't necessarily remember my name, but all they remember is that they took some notes about WinFS, the PDC, they'll be able to ask that question. They'll be able to even go to the calendar and say, oh, here's my PDC week, here's the WinFS press interview I had, right-click, show related items, and there comes me as a contact, there comes their notes as a document, there comes whatever else is related to that event. So able to paint that picture has been really fun. In driving innovation, the thing the company needs is the ability to allow developers outside the company to be more productive and to build things that aren't possible today. And I have a guy on my team who is sort of in this sort of quasi-evangelist job. I mean, he's not really an evangelist, but his job goals are work with the rest of the Microsoft machinery that deals with ISVs and help make them successful, right? So he's working with ISVs, and he's part of those trips down to Adobe and eBay and these things and whatever else. And that's what his life is like, and he's dealing with these ISVs all the time, every day. And one of his review goals are actually very simple. They're great goals, in fact. It's like, we have a certain class of application categories like PIM apps or CRM apps or whatever that we care a lot about. And I want one marquee ISV having built on WinFS on stage with us at the Longhorn launch. Okay, it's a fairly simple goal. Well, I mean, pretty complex, but straightforward, easy to articulate. And then the other one is, I want another ISV on stage with us that I've never heard of before, that's doing a kind of application that we've never dreamt possible before. That's the fun of his job, right? So he's out there at the PC talking to every little ISV, like, so what are you thinking? What are you thinking? Is there some app you're thinking you could build this now? And, scourging the earth to find out what that killer app is going to be that just fundamentally you can't do today, One of the things we talk about in Snares a lot is photographs. In this time frame, photographs will have GPS data with them as well. So when you take the picture, it stamps GPS data has on the photograph. And so imagine now your import wizard. And I don't know who's going to do it. I don't know if the Shell will do it or if Nikon will do it or Canon. It doesn't really matter. Just ignore that part. But just imagine this world where you stick the camera, you plug the camera in, it starts to import these pictures. The code there that's doing the import, doing the acquisition, looks at the photograph, looks at the data on it, and knows things like, okay, it was taken at this GPS coordinates. I'm going to look up in the WinFS schemas, and I'm going to create a relationship between this photograph now and that location in the world. So you can do things like show me all the photographs in Paris or in France, and you get that, the correct result back, right? So that's kind of cool. Now I also imagine that it looks at your calendar and says, oh, well, you were at James Hamilton's Halloween party. So I'll bet this photograph's related to that. So it creates that relationship for you. So suddenly you can go to the calendar and you can say, or you can go into NUI text search and you can say, find me photographs from James's Halloween party, and boom, that answer comes back. You get those result sets. Impossible today, right? I mean, not even remotely possible today. Now imagine that we build decent face recognition algorithms. Hint, hint, you guys. And it looks at each photograph and figures out who's in it, and it creates relationships between the photographs and the contacts in your system of who's in the photograph. So now you can do things like, show me all the photographs in my system stacked by who's in them. Or, I know there's this one great photograph of me and my wife in Kauai from our trip 3 years ago. Now, what is that process today? It's opening up a bunch of directories, looking through the thumbnails, if your eyes are good enough. If not, then looking through them one by one, right? It's just horrendous process. And tomorrow you'll be able to literally type in that query or go to your stacks and sort it and stack it and whatever in the user experience by that, and boom, you get the answer back right away. So this is kind of amazing, right, to be able to think about these kinds of opportunities and innovations as a platform. And then, this last one's sort of a little tongue-in-cheek, but, let's go back to 2.5 hours a day looking for information. If we change that number, if Longhorn changes that number, the stock price will go up. The math is that simple. It really is that simple. If we change that number, the stock price goes up. Just like that. Question?
Yeah, that number sounds really high. Does that include people searching stuff on Google and things like that too?
I think it does. And the IDC report that comes from has that breakdown. But it's still like an hour and a half just looking for stuff that's effectively local, corporate-wide anyhow. There is some amount of time. They try to filter out the time wasted on people just like, I'm a cigar box collector. I want to find all the cool Google sites today. You know what I mean? They try to filter all that noise out. This is really about, I think that number is supposed to be about corporate information that people are trying to act on in their work.
A third of the workday, to say that people are wasting a third of their workday looking for stuff they already know is on their system. That doesn't jive with like common experience.
And I also challenge this room a little bit and say, you guys aren't common experience. I gave the example of someone actually yesterday. Someone was asking me about this, and I said, I have this program manager in my team named Prasanna, incredibly bright, A higher kind of person. And I said, go to Prasanna, ask her to find the meeting notes from this particular meeting last week on her hard drive, and I'll bet she'd come back within less than 30 seconds. Because she's just her brain's just that good. She just knows where it is. She'll know exactly what folder she put it in, and she'll be able to retrieve it just like that. I said, go out in the street, not here in Redmond, not outside Microsoft buildings, the street, but go to downtown Seattle. Wait outside one of the buildings with a bunch of, finance guys, right? Guys that are working in the Morgan building downtown, or guys that are working at one of the advertising agencies downtown. I'm not trying to pick on them as demographics, but just average knowledge workers, people trying to deal with information, and ask them to do the same thing. And I'll bet you'll be sitting there for 10, 20 minutes while I try and look for it, right? And I've gotten a phone call from my mom. I was working on this PowerPoint, and I can't figure out where it is. There's something that in Windows that will tell me where it is. And so, you tell her where the find dialog is, which for some reason is completely buried in Windows as it is. And then it takes forever, which most people, the usability research on the find dialog, and God only knows why they put the dog in there. I don't understand that. But the usability research on that says that the hard drive's going, and that things aren't coming back, they cancel out of it. They stop. Even though it could have given them the correct answer, they just stop because they don't think it's working, right? Because they're not getting the answer back, they think it's not even doing anything at all. It's really bizarre question.
It's kind of a simple problem that I think's plagued computers for decades. We don't have a way of having a kind of persistent reference to a file that doesn't break when the file moves or the name is changed.
Yep.
Path names are
evil.
So what is happening with WinFS to fix that?
I love that question. And I always point people back to, because believe it or not, there are people in the world who are resisting WinFS because we don't care about the name. And they're like, no, I've memorized C:/document setting/Quentin/my WinFS project document / this name of the spec.doc. And that's where I expect to find it. That's where I need to be, and blah, 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 blah. And first of all, I think they're just on crack. Like, they're so diluted in how this stuff works. But we have this thing called item ID, which is a GUID, which uniquely identifies every item in the system. We don't care where it is. You ask us for the item ID, we can find the thing for you. Items can live in more than one folder in the WinFS data model. So I can take an item and I can take a photograph. I'm sure everyone's had this experience. Oh, here's this photograph of my son at my dad's birthday party. Uh-oh, is this a photograph in the my son's folder or in the my dad's birthday party folder? What do I do, right? And at home, I told you I had this 3/4 terabyte of storage, and I had these scripts that run every night that copy. I should use shadow copies, but it didn't exist when I wrote this stuff. But so don't worry about that detail. But I actually copy all my photographs between two physical spinning platters because that's a good way, actually a fairly good way of backing stuff up. And I burn DVDs from time to time. And I look at the logs of these things to make sure it's still running correctly, right? And I occasionally see all of our photographs have been moved, right? I mean, the Xcopy scripts don't know anything different. And it's because my wife has decided she needs to rearrange things differently, right, into different folders. This is okay with WinFS. You can take that single photograph, you can put it both in the my father's birthday party folder, if you have one, which you shouldn't because you're going to relate it back to the calendar item instead. And you can relate it to the photographs of my son folder, which again you shouldn't have because you can relate it to the contacts instead. But nonetheless, if you have multiple ways you want to categorize stuff and you want to use folders to do it, fine with us. Go ahead. You can put it in multiple folders. This has caused us various numbers of headaches, and it's hard to do that. It's hard to do this kind of flexibility in the data model and in the actual implementation, but we think it's the right thing to do. So we have this GUID. You can always identify it by the GUID. It gives you this name transparent way of always finding, or invariant way of finding a piece of data.
My second question related to that somewhat is there any notion of offline storage?
It is offline.
Well, the case you brought up of photographs is actually something close to what I work on, and so if you have a huge collection of digital assets and you want to archive some to some offline
DVD or
storage,
something,
whatever, is there a way of keeping
something about it,
information about that in the file?
Yeah, we have this construct in the data model called ref items. We also call them proxy items from time to time. We use those terms erroneously, interchangeably, but don't let that bother you too much. And proxy items allow you to effectively keep metadata. You still keep an item. It's a real honest-to-God WinFS item. It just doesn't have any of the binary data that normally should be in the item Instead, we got a stub there that says, this is how you go and you find the actual binary data. And it causes some breaks in the user model a little bit, right? Because I can have a bunch of ref items be offline to the source where those ref item streams actually live and operate on them, but then I can't actually open them up in Adobe. I could relate them and I could find them, but then I can't open it up in Adobe. So there are consequences of using that construct. But the benefit it gives you, and the example I always use is, I desperately want someone to build a Longhorn app that allows me to plug in my digital camcorder, stick in a tape, push something, right, and have it go and find every frame, do face recognition on who's in those scenes, right, and create all these ref items of all the stuff I have, when they were taken, what they're related to in terms of calendar events, right? Because, again, all that data is there in the digital camcorder streams, the tapes that are there. So go into index, effectively, all that stuff, find all the interesting things about it, put all the ref items in my system so I can find what tape number and what hour and minute into that tape the pictures of my son taking his first birthday cake and just stuffing the whole thing in his mouth is. You know, the number of hours I spend looking for particular things I know I have is enormous, right? So we provide this ref item mechanism for those kinds of scenarios. So you can take that kind of data offline, if you will. Yeah.
One of the hardest problems with this now is if I have an existing box, then I get a new box, and I want to migrate all my data to the new box. If I'm incredibly diligent right now about choosing good file names and categorization, but you're now adding, which is a good thing on the one box, all these properties and relationships. How the heck do I migrate that?
From
an old box, which I'm going to throw away, or worse,
Okay, so from an old Longhorn box to a new Longhorn box, not from XP. Now, the XP problem is a known problem.
Right, you have to solve that just to
we solve that, but you're asking between Longhorn systems. So between between WinFS stores, you can basically pick up a point in the DAG. So remember, I said you can put a single item in multiple folders. Well, it's not really folders, okay? Items can have any kind of item can have a container relationship. So I could effectively create an item type called, well, actually we have one called playlist. And that actually has holding relationships on tracks that are inside that playlist. But the album that the album tracks belong to also has a holding relationship on those tracks. So in any case, so it's a DAG, right? We describe a DAG. The model's a DAG. So you can pick up the DAG at any point, pick it up, and move it over to some other WinFS system. And we bring that whole DAG over intact, both holding relationships and cross-item relationships, which are these things like authors are to contacts and documents or whatever. And there's a way to interrogate the system to say, okay, I'm looking at this DAG. Now, I know that this thing something inside this DAG probably has relationships to something that's not inside the DAG, right? Like I pick up documents, and there's a folder of documents or something, and it probably has a relationship to authors that are in context that may be in some other part of the DAG. And so there's a way to ask the system, hey, what are all the other items that are related to things inside this holding hierarchy, if you will, this holding DAG, and you can go and get all those items too. So there's a way to pick up everything you need and move it across systems. And on the other side, we know what to do in terms of creating the right entries in the link tables and fix that stuff up, etc. We're also looking at what magic needs to happen when item IDs don't necessarily match up. So I may have a notion of Patrice as a contact different than you do, because maybe we didn't get it from AD, maybe we just entered it because, sort of at some point in the course of our lives, that's what we did. And so I have a document that's authored by him, so I have a relationship to him. You have a document, or I'm giving you that document. Something in the system needs to know that that relationship translates to your version of that same identity. And that's part of what Identity Services is helping us do, because they have this sort of storage invariant, if you will, way of identifying uniquely people in the system. So certain kinds of relationships will have those constructs, but that's a tricky problem. And I don't know what the shell experience will be around this today. Either do they. Like, we're also trying to figure that out, because they know they can pick up a playlist and move it, right? But then they don't know how to ask the user, oh, a track in this playlist has a relationship to the calendar item of the party where you played this song. Do you want me to move the calendar item? Like, they don't know how to ask that. They don't know how to frame that question to an end user. So I think in the shell default experience, things will be fairly rudimentary, if you will. It'll be based on holding containment relationships only. And then other tools and other apps will have the opportunity to do smarter things. And certainly apps can do the right thing. If you move a contact from one instance of Outlook on one machine to another instance of Outlook, some of the app can know to go and do all the right things. I'm getting kicked off. One more question, maybe?
I have a question. I work closely with ISV for the specific SIBO. I mean, the classic scenario is their client works on top of a client database in a side-based SQL Anywhere, for example, ported it to MSD for our implementation within Microsoft as well. So I'm wondering, what is the story for them? Should they be using WinFS, or should they be using SQL Express? What are the advantages, if any, of they using WinFS? Because they need to sync with the data stored on the server side, which could be a SQL Server database, or which could be Oracle, or RDB2.
So the question's about Siebel and what's our guidance to them?
Not necessarily Siebel. I mean, just to generalize it.
Sure.
I'm an application using a data store.
And I understand the question.
Yeah, Jet database.
I understand the question.
Yeah.
People should not be using Jet, period. And that's sort of step number one.
What's the story in?
That's the story today. Like, go use MSD or whatever. So that's one thing. WinFS should functionally replace MSD or SQL Express is what will be called in the future. Functionally, like, you can create tables. We call them creating items instead, but you can effectively create the shape of a data and populate with data. The WinFS model offers you more, like this notion of relationships and WinFS Windows schemas that are built in the system, etc., and a whole bunch of benefits around that, and shell integration you get with that for free and all, etc., etc. But and some of the semantics have changed. Like, you don't do create table now, you do create item type. You don't do trigger, now you do register business logic on this operation, right? I mean, so there's semantic differences, but functionally they're basically, WinFS is a model that supersedes what you can do effectively in MSD. But certain applications, it'll be too hard for them to rewrite in Longhorn time frame. So they're free to download SQL Express and continue to use it. There'll be some optimizations we'll do in the data access layers to make querying across the WinFS store and across traditional data that's in tabular data that's in SQL Express easier. But it'll be available. We'll ship a version of Yukon's SQL Express that'll work on Longhorn, and that's something we'll have to continue to support. But fundamentally, we want people to move to the WinFS data model.
So the second part of the question is, what happens to, for example, Siebel is looking for, and they look at Microsoft and say, what is your unified story for storage across not only desktop, but Pocket PCs, cell phones? The problem they have is the same sync issue, right? You put your contact on the cell phone, all of a sudden they want it to appear on your desktop as well and back in on the server as well. So is there a WinFS for?
We have goals and incredibly high-level plans to bring the WinFS data model down to SQL CE, but we have no detailed plan. We have no execution plan on that yet. Similarly, we will bring the WinFS data model into, Big Brother MS SQL Server, right? The version after Yukon. The data model there will be supported inside our flagship database product. So WinFS actually is that integrated storage vision. I couldn't tell you what the release number and name of the CE version of SQL that will support the WinFS data model is, because we don't have those plans. But we absolutely have the intent, and as we get closer to they're on a tighter, smaller ship cycle. As we get closer to the Longhorn, we'll figure out exactly when the right place to dock that is into. And it will be a subset. It'll have a subset of the schemas. The schemas will be partial. The data model will be probably a little bit looser, right? Less services built into the system, et cetera, because we're under bizarre constraints in terms of memory and whatever else. But the basic model will be supported, and we'll even build the synchronization in such a way that if you're using a Windows type and if you're defining a type, you can even subset your schema to say this is stuff that belongs down in SQL C, and the rest of the system will just work. How smooth that is in exactly the Longhorn time frame, we'll see. But that's our intent. Absolutely. Yep.
What is the performance goal for your market? Because right now, what we see is when we write item into WinFS and when we query item, we pretty much get 10 items, right?
Yeah. Don't talk to me about performance today. It's irrelevant. No, we're literally what's in the PC build is the prototype. It's not. We've been privately working on a different implementation of WinFS over the past 4 or 5 months in a parallel tree. That's where we're just now docking into Longhorn builds. We completely had to re-implement everything effectively. So we're in the process right now of getting this new implementation, this UDT-based implementation into Longhorn. So performance from here on out will get a lot better. In fact, we're already on this part of the curve, which is looking fairly good to us. But it's got to scream, right? I mean, I'm not going to tell you how many items per second for any given exact select statement you feed to me. No, my brain doesn't work like that. I'm not a query processor, right? But the library views, gotta scream. The common queries that people are going to do, gotta scream. Bulk. Someone asked about bulk insert, gotta scream, right? I mean, that stuff's gotta work incredibly fast, and we can. We know how to make it really fast. It's going to take us some time to get there. We already took the initial re-implementation we had. We've already improved performance 1,000-fold, not from what's in the PCs, but from where we started when we got that implementation, quote unquote, done. And so that's just because the indices weren't built correctly yet and whatever else. But nonetheless, the SQL guys, this they know how to do, is make the thing perform. I mean, we didn't, although I think we just got kicked out of TPCC numbers again. But nonetheless, it's one of these dumb races where it's all completely irrelevant after a certain bar, right? I mean, okay, you can manage all the world's transactions in an hour on this new benchmark. Okay, go for it, right? But no, we're pretty confident about performance. It'll be beta 1 before you see perf that people are happy with. So it's going to be several months before you see performance and you're not worried about it anymore. But you'll see progress every month, starting with what we check in at the beginning of December in the Longhorn main. Yeah, we'll get better.
One last question.
Yep.
When we use full text index search and when we get the result back from the search, is there any way we can put our code to filter and modify the search result?
I don't know. You sit down lower in the details that I could answer. But send me a mail. I'll get someone who can tackle that for you.
All right, thanks, Peter.
Thanks. Sorry to run over.